Welcome everybody. My name is Oliver Guirdham from the Business Research Company, and we're doing a presentation today. Tariff environment is that it requires companies to really be looking at different supplier options. That's obviously particularly the case for companies in the US, where they're now some of their suppliers, their foreign suppliers, are going to be their goods and services, or their goods particularly, are going to be much more expensive because tariffs will have been added to them. Then there's, within foreign suppliers, there's a huge variety in terms of the level of different tariffs being applied, and then there can be difficulties with finding US suppliers who are not tariffed for the relevant goods. So it's a very complex picture, and we're talking today about how some techniques for navigating that situation and finding the correct suppliers for your business, and their goods and services, or their goods particularly, are going to be much more expensive because tariffs will have been added to them. Then there's, within foreign suppliers, there's a huge variety in terms of the level of different tariffs being applied, and then there can be difficulties with finding US suppliers who are not tariffed for the relevant goods. So it's a very complex picture, and we're talking today about how some techniques for navigating that situation and finding the correct suppliers for your business, and dynamically managing your supply chain. Good. So if you could move on to the first slide. Yeah, so we're talking about this in three elements. There's the impact on business ecosystems, the operational consequences, and the strategic consequences. And if we so you can see that these changes are sort of rippling through the whole ecosystem, and there are different implications for different parts of your business, and to talk about what those are in a bit more detail. So the impact on business ecosystems. So this is really a kind of a watching brief, where it's more important than ever to be monitoring your business environment, and to be prepared for shocks, and to have early warning systems in place. So having this is shocks that can occur can include things like raw material unavailability, the fact that you're dependent on an unstable zone, whether that be politically or internally unstable, or the level of tariffs or the difficulty of trading with that nation is unstable. So lots of frictions and changes there. There's also the issue of shipping routes. There was a lot of concern about shipping routes during the recent conflict in the Middle East. That seems to have quietened down for the time being, but there are still significant risk factors attached to that. So this, as I said, is really a kind of watching brief, having good searches, crawls. There are a number of tools available where you can be kind of constantly monitoring key search terms and sites for relevant information for your business, so that you get alerts as soon as there are signs of change in the wider environment. So that's something that we recommend ongoing for businesses or for organizations, and for internal research teams to be focused on. But of course, it's particularly prescient during times of rapid change like we're seeing at the moment. Um, which is what we're primarily talking about today, which is the impact on sourcing strategies. Certain regular relationships that you've had for a long time may no longer be attractive, no longer be viable. So you have to rapidly look for new sourcing partners. You may need to rebalance between different geographies, um, and be aware of the very complex picture there, because it's not just the country of origin that you're sourcing from, but potentially, or you might be buying something from an Asian country, but if that goods has come from China, there could be implications there. So there's no sort of easy fixes, perhaps this time, for companies or organizations which are very reliant on particular geographies for their goods. And therefore, they need to rapidly get information and get understanding of what the options are in different geographies, and then make sensible decisions, balancing off the negative of the tariff impact against the negative of changing their sources of supply rapidly, which can be difficult and expensive and risk and can create some risk. We'll talk about how to minimize those risks shortly. But also, there's probably a reason why you were sourcing the goods from the place you were sourcing them from in the first place. And so presumably, if you're forced to move to other sources, they are suboptimal. But so there's balancing those things off against each other. And it's a kind of constantly making decisions is tricky given the rapid nature of change, and the fact there are announcements coming out sort of pretty much daily relating to tariff levels in different countries. And then there's the strategic consequences. This is perhaps looking more at the market side. So the so where you may have had markets that you were selling into. So this is perhaps particularly relevant for exporters to the US, but also in all these things are relevant in all directions, because we don't know what the shakeout is going to be in terms of reciprocal tariffs or tit for tat tariffs. But finding markets where you can sell your goods and you know that you're not going to be penalized, or there'll be less penalization for your goods. So market identification becomes even more important. And where possible, obviously this is not relevant in some cases, looking at more service-based offerings or digital offerings which don't attract these tariffs. So that's more on the kind of market size on the selling side, whereas the other two, so the operational consequences are particularly looking at the supply chain, and then the impact on the business ecosystem is kind of across the ecosystem and monitoring that. Next slide, please. So a brief potted history of trade. So there's a sort of there's a long period of relative trade harmony, basically reaching back from the Second World War. I think this was the creation of organizations to ensure trade stability, the World Trade Organization to intercede to ensure that and get involved in negotiations to ensure that countries' trade disputes didn't spiral. So generally, there was a good amount of free trade, essentially, and the general view is most economists would say that that was a sort of massive benefit to the global economy, and that this led particularly in the 2000s and 2010s to this sort of globalization of the world of the economy, growth of China as a key exporter, and very free movement of goods, particularly goods, and to some extent services around the world. So yeah, you allowing for supply chain integration, multinational companies that were reaching all over the world, establishing complex border supply chains, cross-border supply chains. Tariffs were low and stable generally. And then obviously, yeah, the WTO was playing a pivotal role in maintaining that system, and that was the norm. Next slide. And so I guess the point to make about that is that during that period, you could create it was particularly easy and beneficial to create these sort of longer term relationships with suppliers, to identify suppliers in lower cost environments. So that was a big part of why China was so successful. At the same time, there was all this technological development that allowed for cheaper shipping and movement of goods around the world. So there was huge benefits in essentially creating long-term global partnerships for supply. Now started getting some trade disruptions with the first term of Donald Trump, 2018, imposed 25% tariffs on aluminium, 10% on some other imports. There was particularly there was the focus on China during that period. And there were some strains that came out of that. I think actually this slide is talking about so I'm not quite clear whether we're talking here about the first set of tariffs or I think we're talking more about started in 2018, but we really that was relatively mild, but we're talking particularly about these very sharp tariffs that were introduced in what was called Liberation Day in April. And yeah, so there was definitely some disruption in Trump's first term, but it looks like the disruption is going to be much more considerable in the second term. So after Liberation Day, there was considerable so Liberation Day, which was this rolling out of these very high tariffs across the board. The idea was that there was going to be sort of negotiations, but there would be a 10% minimum tariff across all countries, and then and then specific tariffs for different countries, depending on essentially what the US felt was the trade imbalance that existed between the countries. So yes, so that was a shock to the system. There was the financial markets reacted very badly, etc. There's now been some level of reconciliation and pullback from that. And there was the Geneva conference. So there was which agreed some principles on fair trade, and moved and looked like things were moving in a more agreeable fashion, but there continue to be bilateral negotiations going on. There's supposed to be agreements with each individual country. Some of them have been agreed in principle. Many of them still haven't. The high level agreement, I think, is there with Japan, with the UK, and now with Europe. But I think the thing to note here is that there's still all these tariff levels are still considerably higher than much higher than they were before the start of this process. And while the financial markets have kind of shrugged this off, the it doesn't mean that it's not affecting businesses in a very significant manner. Good. So
Uh,
that's a bit of a
Oliver, before
history.
we move ahead, we have a question in the chat box. So the question is, most of these negotiations were addressed during the Geneva conference, and how are they still relevant in the current context?
Yeah, so I think there's a tendency to feel after the kind of panic of Liberation Day that it's all fine now. I don't think that is the case. There are still very high tariff levels on certain goods, metals, automotives. There continues to be very high tariffs on Canada, which is an absolutely critical trading partner of the US. The situation with Mexico is still fairly unclear, and the situation with China, there's still, a really high level of tariffs, again, higher than in the previous administration. So these things take time to work through the system, but now is the time when companies are really having to grapple with this and rethink their supply chains, etc. So I think this is a very relevant time to be talking about this topic. Good. Any more questions now?
No, I think Oliver, we can proceed.
Good. Right. So how should we make informed decisions in a rapidly changing trading environment? Um, so yeah, so now we're talking a little bit about kind of what you can do about this situation. Next slide. So these are these three factors that we've talked about before. There's the kind of market side where you can identify markets which are less exposed and focus your strategy, your marketing side strategy around them. Then there's tracking the implications and making sure that you're doing your market overview, your market constant tracking of the market so that you're reacting very quickly to new developments. And then there's the particular element of looking at your supplier ecosystems, and that we're going to talk a bit more about that now. So, adopting a flexible supply chain approach. So when faced with this situation where you need to be identifying new suppliers, one of the key things is to not be kind of stuck within your thought box, your existing relationships, your perceptions of the market, but to kind of brainstorm a broader group of potential suppliers in the first place, and really think about different options, different countries that you might not have thought about before, maybe even talking to companies that don't currently offer this good, but have the potential to do so, about partnering with them to move in to develop those supplies. So at the early stage, a really open mind is critical. What kind of things should you then, as you start to narrow down? I'll just talk about the diversification there a bit more. So it should be big geographical spread, and then probably emphasizing those countries that offer lower risk, and that have good relations with your base country. Um, um, there's balancing off working with large multinationals across a number of geographies and then utilizing more agile SMEs. And then there's reducing single point dependencies. And I think that's a really critical thing in this period is to look to get diversified supply chains, particularly at the geographical level, so that you're not dependent on one country. I mean, you could argue that, say, Apple is really facing a lot of risk because of its extremely high level of exposure to China. Now, it has been working hard to diversify that. I think since the first Trump administration, and it's now building operations in India and other places. But given the complexity of its manufacturing and the supply chain attached to that, it needs years to move operations. And the fact that it really put all of its eggs in one basket in China is causing it issues now. Yeah. Supplier levels of supplier integration. So this is an interesting question. It will come up a bit in the one of the case studies that I'll look at later. Over the last sort of 20 years, the main fault in this area has been that really deep relationships where you can so the trend has been towards these very deep supplier relationships, very high levels of communication, in some levels of integration. There are various sort of models set out to facilitate that. And the idea has been that you get more stability, you get higher quality, eventually potentially you may get lower price. I think that can be questionable. And transactional relationships have been seen as risky, having potential quality issues, etc. But of course, in a period of rapid change, that's being relooked at, and the balance between those things are being relooked at, and the attractiveness of modular suppliers that can quickly come in and solve a problem for you, even if they're not deeply integrated into your communication systems and your ESI policies and your ESG policies and all the rest of it, may become more attractive when you have short-term problems to deal with. And then when we think about narrowing down our choices, so kind of legal compliance is critical. ESG is important, particularly if you have strong regulatory requirements on you. And then, of course, pricing is important. But I'd say at times of rapid change, then you may have to sacrifice something on the pricing side to get what you need. And then nice to have, definitely dual location setup is very attractive at the moment, particularly if it's cross-border. And then the kind of tech forward integration that allows these very integrated systems. But again, that may be less emphasized in a time when you're thinking that your supply chain may have to change quite rapidly. Next slide. So how do you go about finding these great new suppliers? So there are different approaches. So first of all, you look at the market for what's being supplied, understand that. Is it fragmented? Is it a monopoly? Is it something with high barriers to entry? Is it something, does it have environmental issues? Is there scarcity of materials or labor affecting that supplier market? So a really good analysis of what kind of your supply from your supplier's point of view, understanding the supplier's point of view and the world they live in, so that you can make the right choices for yourself within that environment. you should be looking to use different tools at this stage. So different databases that give a lot of filtering for the specific requirements that you have. Then obviously secondary research is a huge part of it, but there's still no substitute for getting on the phone and talking to people, talking to experts in the industry, and that's where companies like the Business Research Company can really help. Best practice studies. So this is a really important thing. What are your competitors doing? This is why monitoring the market, picking up the signals is really important. How are they changing their sourcing models? Are they moving more towards single versus multi-source, developing bigger buffer stocks, etc.? So they're setting up an information system that gives you that understanding is really important, and then looking to build on the best practices of your competitors. And then benchmarking, once you've narrowed down on a set of suppliers, really benchmarking them on the critical factors for you. So the KPIs, whether it's compliance KPIs, whether it's geographical KPIs, like what tariff levels are affecting those suppliers, pricing, of course, technology, etc. So getting a kind of scoring system so that you can have a rational and logical way of narrowing down to the correct suppliers. So that hopefully should leave you in a situation to to potentially sign up with a new supplier. So what do you do in the process before you sign that contract? You do a thorough risk assessment of the supplier, looking at the interdependencies, the country risks, what mitigation plans they have in place. You do a pricing study, and potentially use that to negotiate on pricing, but also understand very thoroughly what escalation clauses there are, and what happens to pricing under different circumstances. Contract length. So you think about the length of the contract that you want to sign. Is it these sort of long binding contracts that have been very attractive in the past? Do they make sense in the current environment, or do you want to get something more flexible? Understanding their lead times, getting feedback from other users of that supplier. So that's the kind of research that we often do, understanding the feedback on their timeliness, their professionalism, and then ensuring what quality standards they follow, some of which will be a must-have, and some of which will be a nice-to-have. And then we don't have a slide on this, but obviously the process doesn't end there. Once you get into a contract with someone, there's regular maintenance of that contract, overview of that contract, checking against agreed SOPs, against delivery, looking at how they're developing and whether there are other areas where the relationship can be expanded if it's successful, checking that they continue to be regulatorily compliant and following environmental norms, etc. So there's ongoing process there, and often the second and third contracts are much more detailed and in depth and integrating than the first contract with a particular supplier.
Oliver, we have a question in the chat box. So the question is having access to a comprehensive database more beneficial than relying on market snapshots?
Yeah, so I think at times like these databases, which are sort of continuously updated and uh, reactive, responsive, is a better way to be doing your research than, say, just getting a one-off study. There is room for one-off studies, particularly in, when you're at the close to the decision point of choosing a supplier, or you want someone to help you with the short list. But access to databases, whether they're on pricing. Some of them are publicly available things like, constantly monitoring Alibaba or whatever it is. But many of them are paid for. It's dynamic, so it moves with the changes. Yeah. And obviously we have a database, which is the global market model, which constantly tracks the market size and growth of over 15,000 markets globally. So that's a really useful source if you want to constantly track the potential of different markets, and also the supply side availability, and where the main supply centers are for particular goods and services. Okay, so we're going to finish off with a few case studies. I will go through the first one, and then my colleague Ravi, who's the head of healthcare research at Business Research Company, will run through a few more. So this was a recent project we did. It was a big FMCG company, one of the leading big brands, I guess you'd say, in FMCG in the world. And they wanted to review their facilities management strategy. So people do these very, very in-depth analysis, and it was really a kind of benchmarking and best practice exercise. They really wanted to understand what the trend was in the market, and what their competitors were doing in relation to how they were the models they were adopting for facilities management. So facilities management, in case you're not aware of it, is essentially the outsourcing of the people who run your buildings and your gardens, essentially, or your land, and the often some of the sort of machinery. It doesn't tend to cover the machinery that you make your goods with, but any other equipment that's required, like HVAC or water or utilities, all those things that are supplied to facilities. Could be office blocks, or it could be factories, and it often covers both. So there are these very, different areas that they wanted to look at, how their competitors engaging with different facility management companies. So were they doing it at a global level? Were they doing it at a regional level? Did they prefer using local suppliers, each of which had benefits and drawbacks? How were they? What were the relationship models? So were there performance-related payments? Was there risk sharing? So this brings us back to these kind of quite in-depth, close relationships with suppliers, where but also there's a kind of carrot and stick element, where if suppliers fail to meet their obligations, they can be penalties within the contracts. Were they trying to look for one outsourcer everywhere, or an outsourcer, a bundled outsourcer that used subcomponents, sub-suppliers? Were they looking at a very integrated model, or were they looking at a more diversified model? What level were they in their contracts? So as I said, the focus in early contracts tends to be on the basic things: productivity, uptime, delivery standards, and then as further as the relationship deepens, they tend to start to partner for things like more deeply on environmental and governance issues, but also expecting their suppliers to come up with ideas, introduce technology, etc. And then, very importantly, the financial model. So is it sort of open book kind of cost plus? So all the costs of the facilities manager are clear, and what they're being charged, or is it a sort of closed book, right? This is one fee you pay, we deliver everything. So there are different, and then yeah, cost plus, where you literally sort of see if your supplier buys a new piece of machinery, then it would, or a new AC system, then you would see what that cost and then what was charged on top of it to you. Guaranteed maximum price, so that's where there's openness in the contract, but there's a highest limit, so you know what your ultimate risk is, and then different things. So these just shows, I think the project just showed how complicated and how many different models are involved in these relationships, particularly in a stable environment where these relationships have time to develop over time. But the current environment is emphasizing something slightly different, which is the flexibility and the ability to move between suppliers is also really important. Thanks. So I'll hand over to Ravi to just talk through a few more case studies.
Sure. Thanks, Oliver. Good evening, all. So the next case study is regarding the supply chain analysis of a cardiovascular patches. This is a unique life science product. So generally, the life science products, including these as well as several other vaccine studies that we conducted, that differs with the traditional supply chain in having issues like cold chain requirement or uh, low volume of the product to be supplied directly to the use to the customer use like hospitals or healthcare provider. So in this scenario, a client wanted to know the complete distribution landscape and supply chain models of a specific cardiovascular patch being used in cardiovascular surgeries across various European countries. So client wanted to know how the competitors are uh, supplying the patches, where these patches are being manufactured, where they are being supplied to which country, and how are they being supplied? Are they being supplied the cold chain requirements? Do they have any warehouse requirement? And what is the demand forecasting of the volumes of these patches that for the next 5 or 10 years? So we did a detailed study, try to understand even the unmet needs of the current marketed supply chain, marketed products. Are there any unmet needs? Are there any challenges during the supply chain? And then we provided a clear strategies on how many volumes of these products are in demand for the next 5 to 10 years, where the client needs to establish any warehousing needs across the Europe, and how they need to partner with any freight companies which provide these cold chain requirements for the supply of these products directly from the manufacturing side to uh, the hospital or healthcare provider in demand. So this is a unique study where we try to understand the challenges faced by typical niche healthcare products that involves low shelf life, cold chain requirement, and low volumes directly used at the site of care and directly shipped from the manufacturer to healthcare provider. So this is a complete end-to-end supplier as well as contract manufacturer and distributor analysis, where one of our client only has a technology to develop a new conform diagnostic kit for bovines and used in the on-farm for various cattle diseases, bovine mastitis specifically. So the client has only technology. So he wanted us to do a study where we need to identify contract manufacturers who have capability to uh, manufacture such test kits in large volumes and who can even have certifications, have regulatory compliances, and who can source the needed components such as test strips or other needed components for the kit from various suppliers. So we did supplier assessment as well as contract manufacturer assessment, and then we selected a few major suppliers as well as contract manufacturers who can manufacture the kit for our client, and then also who can partner with the local distributors who can distribute these kits to various distributors and also to the various farms. And we also did a study connecting to the last mile delivery partners who can supply these kits to the farms located at distant locations. So it's an end-to-end study where from the supplier to the contract manufacturer to the distributor to last minute delivery agents who can provide the kit from the manufacturing site to the farm that they are going to use to test the cow with various diseases. So here the client came to us only with the technology, patented technology they have, and we developed the complete ecosystem of the supplier as well as uh, the distributors and contract partners that help the client to have a complete supply chain ecosystem to the farm from the manufacturing side to the farm. This is a research study on jumper wire where a specific type of wire client wanted to understand the manufacturing basis, distribution models, and specifically risk scenarios of freight disruption or warehousing or custom bottlenecks. So we did a detailed study understanding 20 plus competitors who provide such specific jumper wire product, try to understand where their manufacturing bases are, what are their production capacities, how are they supplying, where are their warehouses located, are they partnering with any partners who supply to the different regions, and we provided a complete strategy that client have used it to develop their own supply chain for this jumper wire product. Yes, this is one unique study where a client has developed a new LINAC, a radiotherapy device used for oncology therapy. And client do not want to establish any sales or service uh, divisions, and he wanted to partner with any third party companies who can provide such sales or service divisions for their LINAC devices. So we did a in-depth assessment of various third party service or sales providers based on the number of uh, uh, any imaging modalities that they sell, and also for the service companies based on the turnaround time, client satisfaction, and the number of service episodes that they conduct on behalf of their partners. And then we try to assess uh, interest of those third-party companies to partner with our client, and we help the client to establish outsourcing their sales and services divisions to other companies for their new radiotherapy device. So we did several assessment of we did speak to several stakeholders, understanding the service relationship, the key parameters, KPIs around the sales and service for different radiotherapy devices, and help our client to partner with a best service and sales provider. Yes, so uh, this is a one good study where one of the pharmaceutical companies, MNC company having their base across US, Europe, UK, and they wanted to relocate their existing divisions or existing company. They wanted to split their company based upon the manufacturing, regulatory, clinical development, and other functions. So based on these functions, they want us to recommend on suitable places where they could relocate the company, the suitable clusters, so any manufacturing clusters where they could easily get the resources that need, any specific locations where they could easily conduct clinical trials, which are very close to other healthcare providers. And so we did a very detailed study, try to understand where all the pharmaceutical companies, major pharma companies have located their functions across different US, European countries, and UK. I try to understand why the companies are located at at such locations? What are the advantages in establishing their bases at certain manufacturing clusters or certain locations where they have easy access to clinical development or regulatory assessment? And then we propose the catchment locations where locations 2 to 3 locations where they could relocate some of their business functions for rapid conducting of their business functions.
Great. I think okay, that's it anyway. Great. Thank you very much, Ravi.
Thanks, Oliver.
So I think there's a question in the group, right, Soumya or Falguni?
Yes, Oliver, I'm looking at it. So the
Did you want to
question
read?
is, how effective are bilateral FTAs or FTAs within small groups in tackling tariffs, especially the Trump tariff kind? Considering that the US is a large buyer market, can FTAs effectively negate Trump's tariff if one has to let go the US market?
That's a very good question. I don't think there's one single answer to that, but I guess so when we talk about FTAs, we're talking about free trade agreements. So a lot of countries are rapidly this has given an impetus to trade agreements between different countries. There's a lot happening across Asia. There's a lot happening. For instance, India and the UK signed a trade agreement that had been stuck for a long time. So the kind of positive side of this is that it's kind of freeing up trade relations, which have been a bit stuck for quite a long period, because there's a real impetus between trying to find new trade relationships. That said, when you look at sort of the global market model, or in terms of the size of markets, the US is such a critical market for many industries that it is not an easy thing to be replaced overnight. But we are seeing a lot of innovative approaches and governments attempting to help their supplying companies. So I think there's an example in Canada where, for instance, they're redirecting. I think it's some of the aluminium that they mine, which has traditionally a very high proportion of it has gone to the US market. Now a lot of it is blocked or facing high tariffs. They're using that to have a sort of home building drive and using it internally. So they're even without trade agreements, there are examples where governments are stepping in to try and help suppliers create markets. But yeah, you obviously need to look at the individual example in order to know how viable that is as a whether it's a complete alternative or whether it's just a matter of mitigating the worst impacts of tariffs. The other thing is that as the things shake out, it doesn't look like the US market is going to be completely cut off from most countries. It's just going to be a little bit more challenging, and suppliers can perhaps expect some decrease in their sales to the US market, depending on where they're based. In some countries like the UK, it might be a benefit because they're tariffed lower than other countries, even if you're getting some tariffs. If it's something that's not heavily produced in the US, you might actually get some benefit from it. So there's a very varied picture. But I think what you can say is that there are opportunities being created by these trade deals and these initiatives. And again, that constant monitoring of the market is critical under those circumstances. Do we have any other questions from anyone?
Please feel free to drop your question in the chat box, or you can ask us directly.
So, in the meantime, a quick pitch for TBRC. So we are what we say, the business research company. We offer a wide range of market reports on 15,000 companies. So introductory reports telling you about the market size and the competition and the trends within a particular market. And we do customized research, like the studies that Ravi was talking about, really in-depth studies based on clients' key questions. Anything, we're talking about supply chain, but we do a lot of market sizing work. We do a lot of competitor analysis. We do supply, we do regulation, anything basically that can go that the kind of information and understanding that goes into a business plan or to a go-to-market strategy, we can support in giving you better quality information towards that. Good.
Yeah, Oliver, as there are no questions at the moment, I think we can now conclude the webinar.
Lovely. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. And do get in touch if you would like to discuss any of the topics that have been raised today further, or to focus in on the particular challenges that you're facing in realigning your supply chain.
Thank you, Oliver, and thank you, Ravi sir, for the insightful presentation. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We hope you found this session insightful, and we look forward to having you join us in our future webinars, which would cover topics like competitive intelligence in further depth. So we are looking forward to having you all join us. Thank you again.